Guten Tag. Kale. Bawani. Good evening. Hello. Buenos noches. My limited linguistic capabilities. I'm saying hello to everyone and hoping for the life of me that everyone can hear me. Okay. How's it going, all? If you can hear me, make yourself known in the chat. Peace to all. Happy birthday, David. Ogundipe, my Yoruba brother. Happy birthday to you. There you go. You get a little show on the screen for that. Everyone wish David a happy birthday. Thank you for joining me on the stream on your birthday. Isn't that nice? Sounds good, everyone says. Is Wallace E.A. Budge's book, Easy Lessons in Egyptian Hieroglyphs, any good? Well, it's ironic that you say that because that's going to be the reference point for most of the work I do. I've been told, Macy, that it's not the best. You should get Gardner over Budge. But I think Budge provides a nice sound foundation which you can then build upon. I think he approaches the concepts that you need to get started really well. And also I think some of his translatory work clusters closer to parts of Africa than the later renditions, which seem to take more of a Semitic slant. So that's my rationale. Actually, we might even touch on one of those kind of differences in translation today, and then you can make your own judgment. But there you go. That's my feedback for your question. But yeah, good evening all. I had this stream scheduled for yesterday, and then I pushed it out because yesterday ended up being really hectic and a bit mad. Today hasn't been much better, but I feel like I've got just enough content to be able to have a decent-ish discussion today about a topic that I've wanted to cover with you guys for a little while. And I kind of put it into presentation format to help me to organize my thoughts and to organize my attack of this subject so that I'm not rambling too much. So there should be a bit of structure to this, which will make for a more enjoyable, I'm hoping, stream, but at least it will make it more organized for me, because this is a topic that I could get lost in quite easy. It's not a topic that I would feel comfortable freestyling, totally, non-rehearsed on, because I'm admittedly not the most schooled person in this field. I don't try to present myself. If you've been on any of my previous streams, I've done a couple of previous streams about Medu Neter. I really like to just kind of like cover the basics and take you on the journey at the same pace at which I'm learning, so that I'm not, essentially it's a good starting point for you. And I think today's discussion and some of the evidence that I'm going to show you really leans towards your approach to not just hieroglyphics, but symbology as a whole within the sphere of ancient Kemet and the African world. And I think my intention is to open your eyes to how pictorial symbology was used and adopted, and how that eventually would come to form what is the language of Medu Neter. But the language of Medu Neter started as a logographic, pictographic communication device. And one of the things that I'm going to try to really impress upon you is that this is the archetype. Medu Neter, or hieroglyphs, is the archetype to writing. It's the original. So we didn't start off writing and then create Medu Neter or then create hieroglyphs. We started off with hieroglyphs. And the reason, and that's the progenitor to all written scripts, all modern written scripts anyway. I'm not saying there weren't other written scripts. Some would argue the Sumerian cuneiform is its own independent thing, but cuneiform didn't survive, and cuneiform doesn't have any children. However, Medunetta, the language of the ancient Egyptians, gave birth to every single script that we have today. And that's not something that's actually, well, that's something that's pretty, I won't say universally, but I would say almost unanimously agreed by linguists and people who study, epigraphers. They say, yeah, there's a clear line of descent coming from hieroglyphs that lead to all these different languages. Most of you would have heard of the Phoenician Abjad, which was the Phoenician script, but the Phoenician Abjad is almost directly correlates to them getting pretty much all of the characters for the Abjad directly from the hieratic script and the Demotic script of ancient Egypt. So the Phoenician Abjad was by no means spontaneous creation. It absolutely was inherited. So I'm going to try and convey some of these, at least my interpretations of the order of things, and also the impact of how the worldview of the ancient Egyptians shaped their approach to the language, and how the language, or at least the script, or the art, I should say, itself, was actually a lot more than just the attempt to convey sounds, which is what we boil it down to today, because we are script minded. We are script centric, so to speak. We're a script centric people, but they weren't a script centric people. They were a pictocentric people, and that made them much more closely aligned to things like universal concepts, which we struggle to understand. It also made it much easier for them to communicate using the polysemic layers that existed within their language. Now, some of this might be going over your head, but I don't think it will by the end of the stream. I think a lot of it will make a lot of sense. I hope anyway. And if it doesn't, I'm open for discussion. I'm also very open to learn. So I think that's my intro out of the way. I'll be trying to keep an eye on the chat, because I think people will have questions, and I'll try my best to address as much as possible. I will come on to Insibidi Macy. I think that's a David, I'm going to pull you off the screen now, but yeah, happy birthday again. I feel like that's something that I'm definitely going to need to progress onto very soon. Obviously, as you can imagine, there's not as much supporting work out there for Insibidi, so we have to do a lot of work to to kind of like dig out as much as possible. Yeah, Shegan, no problem, sir. No problem, sir. I don't know what the Yoruba is for you're welcome. That's how you could pay me back. You could tell me how to say you're welcome in Yoruba. Okay. Cool. All right. Let's now get it cracking. And before I get going, let me just give this lovely donation of $100 to put me in a fantastic mood to start off with. Let's see, been bringing out a lot of your content for the last couple of days, so I'm glad I came across that Metatron video that led me to your response video. Keep stepping on these haters. You should do a Q&A with the people once in a blue. Peace from New Jersey. Well, I think potentially, thank you very much, Keo. That's really generous. And I'm over the moon with that donation, so I appreciate you very much. I do open up the chat quite often, and I was actually thinking potentially to do it today, depending on what kind of pace we break into, because I think a lot of people will want to have some kind of discussion or feedback based on what we go through today. So yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate you. Yeah, and thank you all of those in the chat. Johnny says, I'm a white guy who loves your videos. Fantastic. I'm really glad to hear that. Lovely. So this stuff's been unstudied all Thai time. I don't know what that means, Chiquita. But yeah, anyway, there's 72 live with us at the moment. So I think at that point I want to get started in this presentation. So let's get cracking, really. Let's get cracking. I'm excited to share this with you, but also excited by my uncertainty of it all. So here's to hoping this goes well. Let me scroll back to 1, and then I'm sure there's a way of going full screen without going full screen. Let me close that. Close. Boom. And you can move something up. No, that's already been moved up. I guess that will do. I guess that's big enough. I'm going to hide your donation now, Kia. Thank you very much again for that. All right, let's get cracking. Let's get cracking. I could go into presentation mode, but yeah, let me go into presentation mode. Let me go full screen. Why not? So let's view, and I got to bring the menu back. Boom, boom, boom. View. Full screen. Let's go full screen maybe without going presentation mode. Yeah, that's almost good enough. I think that's good enough. I'm going to leave it like that. I hope you guys don't mind a bit of a border. And I'm going to hide myself. There you go. Because you don't need to see me. That doesn't add any value, does it? So let's let's do that. There we go. Lovely jubbly. All right, let's get into this. So can Egyptologists really read Medu Neter? Okay. Now, I've put a disclaimer on here, and this is really important for everybody to understand. Okay. This is not an attempt to disprove or discredit the work of Egyptologists, epigraphers, linguists, Egyptian philologists, anyone within that field at all. So I have to really make sure that is communicated as clearly as possible. Okay. My hope from this video and from this live stream is that you'll take away some additional understandings about African ways of thinking, and also the actual language of the Medu Neter, layers upon layers that are important, that perhaps have been missed, either accidentally or deliberately, by people who study the language in a very literal way, because people are very much influenced by their surroundings. So I've said here, it's very possible to translate entire texts incorrectly. That's important to see. I missed out the ly there, you see, because I wrote this in a hurry. To translate entire text incorrectly, that's really important to understand. Okay, so for instance, someone could come out of a translation and read it all, and it sounds really, really like convincing because it links up and all the grammar's in place, and the entire thing could be incorrect. That is a possibility. I must stress that. Okay, just because Egyptologists or certain people have an interpretation, it doesn't necessarily mean it's correct. Aspects of it can be correct, with large swaths of it being incorrect. So I said, yet it's very possible to translate entire text incorrectly, yet absolutely legibly, if one has the presumption of what terms mean that is foundationally incorrect. So if your foundations are faulty, is the point that I'm pressing here, you can run away with yourself, translate things, and you're completely missing it. One of the things that comes to mind, in fact, we're going to come on to this anyway, but one of the things that comes to mind is the conversation I had with Smash Rockwell the other day, and we were talking about the cannibal, I can't remember what it's called, stele or whatever it is, and it's called the cannibal stele because when Egyptologists came across it, they took the literal translation of basically a pharaoh saying that he's going to eat his enemies and eat some of their gods or whatever, to literally mean he's got to eat them. And then Smash Rockwell had to communicate and say, no, it doesn't literally mean eat. There's a layer of allegory there. This is simile. This is, and I'm actually going to take that one step further and show you how essentially the hieroglyphs can be expanded, or should be expanded, to include concept around the image All right, and this is going to make sense very soon. This problem is greatly amplified in the translation of pictographic languages, which in essence is similar to interpreting artwork. So the point that I'm making here is that pictographic language is not the same as written script. So when we're taking pictographic language and we're trying to do one-for-one translations to words, we are missing the energy, we are missing the point of the language. And what we're doing is we're trying to make it fit into our modern paradigm or our modern understanding of linguistics. And it was never supposed to do that. A pictographic script is supposed to not only be read, it's supposed to be beheld. The script or the presentation in total is communicating something to you that you have to look upon to be able to fully fathom what is taking place. So that's where it's different. We have a script where it's meaningless until we read through it. And when we read through it from start to end or whatever, we have a feeling about what took place. However, when it comes to the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic language, this is something that was to be beheld like a piece of art, and it could convey one or multiple understandings based on how many times you read through it. And once again, this will continue to hopefully make sense as we go through a couple of examples today. Okay, and let's go. All right, so basics of Medunetta. Now, those of you who've been through my Medunetta videos, if you have, I'm not sure if you have or you haven't, but if you have, I encourage you to go through those. I've done a few videos. I might play a short. Now. Sorry, I hadn't planned to do this, but I think I might play one of my shorts, which summarizes the difference between logographics, ideographics, and phonetics. Most of you probably have seen that content before. Let me get some votes in the chat. If you want to get a nice kind of summary, I think it's like 3 minutes long or something like that, if that, about how the basics of the Medunetta language works that I've done in the video, and I could just play it in this live stream now. Put a 1 in the chat so I can see what the kind of appetite is for that. Unless you want me to kind of like, unless you kind of are happy for me to explain it, and then we'll just kind of like carry on. So put a 1 in the chat if you'd prefer to watch the video, because I could source it quickly. So there's a few. That's 1, 2, hit 5. Okay, cool. We got enough ones there. Okay, so this won't take me a second. Let me quickly just pull up that video, and we'll do that instead, because I think that might be a more fruitful way, especially if I've already organized that in the previous video. I was going to read through this, but I actually thought to myself, let me show you the video because it explains it, I think, quite well. Boom. Monologue. Okay, this shouldn't take a second. No, not the alphabet. We want maybe shorts. Yeah, we want shorts. Okay, so let's actually go be a minute video because I'm going to show you a short instead. I was going to show you an actual a long one, but I think, I know it's 2 shorts. So we're going to watch 2 shorts back to back, and the 2 of them together should explain what I'm trying to explain on this slide, but in a nice visual way. So let's do that. Let's pull this onto the screen. Boom, boom. Close down the YB, one of my favorite channels. I'm a boxing fan, and let's get to where we were supposed to be going, which was here. Okay, so we'll start with this one.
These are literal pictures of things known as logograms. These symbols serve the function of being language agnostic, in that as long as the person is familiar with the object's form, they should be able to understand the meaning regardless of the language they speak. Examples of pictograms in the ancient Egyptian language are hen representing an infant, remet representing a man, or sir, a giraffe. Ideograms are similar to logograms in that animate and inanimate objects were used. However, in this case, they were used to represent concepts. This allowed the Kemites to greatly increase the capabilities of their lexicon and access more abstract concepts. An example of ideographic symbolism is found in the Ankh symbol, which was used to convey the concept of life, or the Nefer symbol representing beauty. All determinatives were either logographic or ideographic. Finally, these are literal.
So that's part one. Did everyone hear that okay, by the way? Just hit a yes if the audio was fine for that, so I just know that everyone heard that fine. And I'll move on to part two. Well, actually, I'm going to assume you all heard it because you'd all be complaining if you didn't. You'd be like, we can't hear anything, King. So I've got I'll move on.
Finally, there are phonetics or phonemes. Egyptologists boiled the Kemetic abjad down to 24 consonantal phonemes, according to Adele. Examples of these alphabetic phonemes are this squiggly line for N and this loaf symbolizing T. However, there are a myriad of phonetic symbols combining letters that give both single and multisyllabic sounds, such as this symbol for Ka and this symbol for Mu. Now, briefly revisiting the use of determinatives in the Kemetic language, these were used likely due to the homophonic nature of the Kemetic language in that the same word could have multiple meanings. The use of determinatives provided context to the symbols being used, such as this symbol determining that this word refers to the name of a god. Thus, determinatives will play a key role in understanding how to interpret the phrase. Finally,
there. So that's pretty much all concepts that we know on a literary level when it comes to how the ancient Egyptian language is formulated. So let's just revisit this in the slide. I hope that made sense. I know it's kind of at a fast pace, but we can just kind of like verify and go through it now. So we kind of have essentially logographic or pictographs or logographs, which is essentially the basis of the language. And these are your most basic forms when you literally have a image that kind of like shows you directly without any kind of conceptual layer what it's trying to communicate. Now, actually, these are quite rare in the ancient Egyptian language because even ones that you think are just really basic logograms tend to have an ideographic nature, i.e. they are communicating a concept as well. So a lot of them aren't as straightforward as just here's an image and it means this. That's kind of at the crux of what we're going to be discussing today. There tends to be, a lot of the time, there is a kind of a bit of a metaphysical layer that you have to understand the language to be able to unpeel. The next one is the ideographic or the ideograms, like we discussed, where you have the simply ideas. So the thing being portrayed doesn't really have anything to do with, it doesn't look like the word. So for instance, you know, that the one that people are familiar with, the one I showed there, is the Korah, or at least what I think is a Korah. And actually Budge agrees that it's a Korah as well. I think in recent times they've revised that. Budge says it's an African lute, which is basically a Korah. I think it's a Korah, and that's the symbol for Nefer, which we interpret to mean beauty. And there's a reason why we associate that instrument with beauty, which we're going to come on. Well, actually, we're not going to come to. I'm not sure if I've got an example, but I might build on that one. So if you want to challenge me when we're going through examples later, tell me to speak about Nefer and give you my opinion on that. Actually, we'll come on to that. But that's ideograms. And then you have ones that aren't as kind of clear cut as to even what they are. There are a lot of symbols that we don't quite know what they are. Like this kind of like determinative for towns and villages, this funny shape in the middle over here, this one that we know was used for Kemet itself when it was called Tarmeri, when it was called Tawi, and when it, actually no, I don't think it's used in Tawi, it's used in Tarmeri. In Tarmeri they used two of these actually in a single iteration of the word, but then when it was used in Kemet they just used one of these. So we know they used to call their own land this, but then every single gnome, if it was an ancient Egyptian gnome, it had to have one of these in the name. So you'd see it in Wast, or Waset, or you'd see it in Mennefer, you'd see it in Sa, which is Sais, for instance. So any of the actual ancient Egyptian cities or sepats or nomes, you might know them as, they would all have this symbol. Okay, and then the one that most people will kind of be the starting blocks for anyone who's trying to get into Medinetta. It's the phonemes, because these are the ones that we associate with our alphabet. These are the ones that break it down and make it easy to talk or speak the ancient Egyptian language. And if you look for examples online, you'll see lots of different versions, and that's because the ancient Egyptian language itself, it had a lot of homophonic terms, including homophonic phonemes. So what that essentially means is different ways to construct the same sound. Okay, so there's a lot of that in the ancient Egyptian language. So for instance, the S symbol here is not the only S symbol. Okay, you also have a kind of a flat line with two little squiggles in it. This one over here, which is often interpreted as the S symbol as well. You have the U symbol, which is this swirly swirl over here, but sometimes it's a little chick, a little baby chick, which is called the U bird. So you have a couple of symbols giving you the U sound. For M, you have the owl, but sometimes it's kind of like this two-tiered kind of like thing with a bend in it, like that. Just look at my picture. That's, I'm trying to kind of like draw it with my hand. It's like that. It does kind of like a long elongated C shape, so to speak. Also gives you the M sound. H as well, we have a twisty rope for H, as well as this kind of like Het. This symbol here is called Het, which means house or temple, I should say. This is kind of an abbreviated version of it. So you get a lot of double ups. So if you was to go online and have a little search around, you'd get these things doubling up. But essentially, the ancient Egyptian language, which is, alphabet, which isn't really an alphabet, it's more of an abjad, because although it includes vowels, strictly speaking, it doesn't. So when we translate the ancient Egyptian language, all of the vowels are changed to consonants. Okay, so to give you an example of that really quickly, without trying to give you too much, because I don't want to make your brains explode or anything, but strictly speaking, this symbol over here, which we have as E, is turned into a J a lot of the time to make it to kind of this symbol here, these two reads, is turned into a Y. So we have this habit of turning anything that's a vowel into a consonant. The U sound is turned into a W, because that gives us the ability to start words with them as well. Weak consonants, exactly. Harwan said it. It's called weak consonants. So basically, it's a mixture of consonants and weak consonants, which makes it an abjad as opposed to an alphabet. Okay, so I'm not going to go into any more detail, because that's unnecessary for us to get into that much detail. Because what I'm trying to do is sell your concept here, and that's what I'm doing. I'm selling a concept here. So I hope I'm not losing anyone, because I'm going to move on now. So this is where we get into the Kemetic perspective. Okay, and this is where it kind of anyway, this is where it gets quite interesting. So I'm going to read something to you really quickly, which is really small, so I'm going to expand it. I didn't realize it was that small, so let me make it a bit bigger so I can read it. Says, is that going to expand, or is this going to ignore me? There we go. The primary function of the Egyptian ideograms is to represent thoughts. Oh, by the way, this text is from a book called The Egyptian Hieroglyphic Metaphysical Language by Mustafa Gadala, which is actually, it's a book that will go over most people's heads, and a book that a lot of people will be skeptical with. But when you get under the hood of it, it actually does touch on some really key concepts that kind of marries with my thought process anyway. And that's one of the reasons why I've kind of taken a few references from it. But anyway, let me read on. The primary function of the Egyptian ideograms is to represent thoughts. This means one must be searching for both the figurative. An object stands for one of its qualities. So figurative meaning, what do we associate an object with? Okay, i.e. what qualities do we associate with an object? And the allegorical. Okay, so an object that is linked through enigmatic conceptual purposes. So allegories are what we project onto it. Okay, so there's a slight difference there. So you have the figurative, which is things that we associate with a thing, an object, or an animal or a person. There are things we associate instantly when we see it, but then there are concepts, and those are things that we project onto it, which are normally based on culture or normally based on our level of understanding of that thing. I hope that's making sense, because this is going to be quite important to what we go through today. We must always keep in mind the relationships between visual forms and their meanings. And this is important because what I said earlier, remember, the ancient Egyptian language started as a pictorial language. Started as a pictorial language, didn't start as a script. They didn't get a script and say, we're going to make pictures now. They got their language and said, we're going to convert our language into meaningful pictographs, meaningful ideograms that are going to convey what we need to communicate as wholly as possible. And when we get into, in the next few slides, the polysemic nature of the ancient Egyptian language, or of African languages in general, you're going to realize, well, actually it was almost not inevitable. It was almost compulsory. That's a really poor word, but anyway, yeah, it was basically they had to do it. Is the easiest way for me to say it. They had to start with pictures because that's how multi-layered and expressive a lot of African languages are, and I'm going to give you some examples of that. So it says, we must always keep in mind the relationships between visual forms and their meanings. A visual form may be mimetic or imitative, directly copying features of the object it represents. It may be associative, suggesting attributes which are not visually present, such as abstract properties incapable of literal depiction, like we talked about earlier with the Nefer symbol, meaning beauty. Okay, that's a property of, I believe, the instrument that was being portrayed. Okay, so the kora, or the lute, which plays this beautiful music. Okay, so that's beauty is a property of the instrument. That's something that we project upon it. Okay, and finally, it may be symbolic, meaningful only when decoded according to conventions or systems. So this is where you need to have inevitable is a better word. Thank you, Turtle Island. Inevitable is a better word. But yeah, so this is when it's when you have to be in the know. This is where that kind of layer of secrecy comes into it, where they've agreed on a symbol, but if you're not in the know, you're not going to know why they've chosen this particular symbol. And I believe some of the words, some of the determinatives that we come across fall under that meaning as well. So some of it was supposed to be understood by loads, others, some, and others, no one but the people who are in the know. That's kind of how it works. Okay. Meaningful only when decoded according to conventions or systems of knowledge, which, though not inherently visual, are communicated through visual means. As noted earlier, the Egyptians' careful observation of and profound knowledge of the natural world enabled them to identify certain animals with specific qualities. This is really important. So what's being spoken here is that the Egyptians were able to identify the right animals to associate with the right concepts because they had a profound knowledge of the natural world. And this is something that I believe is reflected in a lot of African societies. They didn't have a superficial knowledge. They had profound scientific understandings of the flora and the fauna that surrounded them, which allowed them to be selective and careful and correct in their choice of what made up the different parts of their their drawn language. Okay, so that's really quite important for us to understand, with specific qualities that could symbolize certain divine functions and principles in a particular pure and striking fashion. Okay, so I just wanted to read that to you because this hopefully is going to start uncovering some of these things, and some of you are already thinking along the right lines already. From what I can see in the comments, you've already got your minds in motion, and that's exactly what I wanted to see, because this is a different way of interpreting the ancient Egyptian language, which you won't get. Now, on the next slide, This is really important slide because I've written here hieroglyph to hieractic. Okay, and this is essentially how the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs ended up becoming, well, what it didn't end up, progressed onto hieractic. Now, the good thing about the hieractic script is that even in its most scripty format, the hieractic script still left the symbols somewhat identifiable. They weren't totally identifiable, they were somewhat identifiable. So what did the hieractic script allow? It allowed for people who already knew how to read hieroglyphs to still be able to get the full communication from a piece of text, i.e., not just seeing letters, things they've converted from pictures, but still seeing a remnant of the pictures. Because remember, the pictures are communicating something to you. And that's why it's important that we don't lose the pictures. So we can see from the progression from 1 to 4 over here, how the hieractic script eventually broke down the pictures into vaguely recognizable images, but that were much easier to draw. Now, here's where the issue comes in. When we went from hieractic to demotic, demotic completely and entirely loses the pictorial aspect. So demotic is literally just a script. That's what it is. And when the ancient Egyptians started writing in demotic, they lost the metaphysical link to be able to interpret pictorially what was going on. Yes, they could interpret textually and understand the meaning of, so to speak, the words, but now that meaning was translated to single terms, which mean a single thing. They'd lost the polysemic nature of the symbols, because the symbols, remember, are communicating multiple things. But once you translate that symbol to a word, that word only communicates one thing. And this is what's lost from going from one to the other. And that's really quite important to kind of understand. All right. So something is lost in turning the Nedu Netta into a script. And this is something that was understood by historians. This isn't something I'm just making up. We're going to go through a few texts here, and you're going to see that this is something that's being communicated by various contemporaneous people, including Diodorus, who kind of expresses it as well. So we're going to go through a few of those. All right. If you're still with me, and if the pace is okay, hit a 1, because I know I'm going through quite a lot today. But let me know if you're okay with what we're covering and with the pace that we're hitting it with, because I don't want to just be sitting here talking to myself. We'll cover quite a lot, and I kind of want to take you on the journey with me. So let's hit a 1 if you're good, and the pace is hitting you okay. Cool. Got a few 1s in there. Haven't lost, well, too many people so far, so this is good. And there's 142. If you haven't hit the like buttons up, please do hit up the like button. Okay, let's carry on. So this is demotic text, and as you can see from demotic text, specifically here, this is the who can recognize this middle one? I won't tell you what it is, but some of you will recognize that screenshot, even though it's a pretty poor one. We'll know where that's from. If you know where that's from, let me know in the chat, and I'll read out the person who gets there first. But this is demotic text, okay? And I've written here, reducing the language to a text-based script, remove the conceptual and allegorical container that provided Rosetta Stone. Thank you, Johnny. Quickest off the mark there. Fantastic. So this is from the Rosetta Stone. An allegorical container that provided holistic context of what was being communicated. So although we were still essentially in the same language, so to speak, what we had lost is the holistic communication that came with writing, or at least drawing in hieroglyphs. People weren't able to behold a scene. Remember what I was speaking about earlier? Behold a scene and get the context and the understanding and the feeling of what was going on, the kind of like second layer of communication based on the weighting of the imagery. What they were getting is just a bunch of words which you had to read through in order to understand the context. So this is really important. Something was lost when we became demotic from the hieroglyphics, and this was touched on by Diodorus. Okay, so let's read Diodorus' important observation. This is a quote that I've read to you guys before, but I'm going to read through this again because this is really important. So this is from Bibliotheca Historica, Book 3, Chapter 3. They say also that the Egyptians are colonists, and this is written between 60 and 30 BC. Okay, they say also that the Egyptians are colonists sent out by the Ethiopians. So remember, the Ethiopians are the Central Africans, and the larger part of the customs of the Egyptians are they hold Ethiopian. So he's basically saying a lot of the customs of the Egyptians they inherited from Central Africa. The colonists still preserving their ancient manners. Okay, so the ancient manners that came from Africa. Now, for instance, this is where it gets really important. The belief that their kings are gods, the very special attention to which they pay their burials, and many other matters of a similar nature are Ethiopian practices. So there's a clear line of inheritance here. Let's carry on. While the shapes of their statues, and this is important because when we're talking about hieroglyphs, we are talking about statues as well. We're talking about symbology as a whole. Remember, hieroglyphs weren't just literally what they put on the wall when they had a writing to do. It was carried throughout ancient Egyptian symbology. You can even see this staff here. This is called a hek. Okay, it's depicted exactly the same way in hieroglyphs as it is in this picture. Okay, as is Tahuti. But anyway, let's carry on. The shapes of their statues and the forms of their letters are Ethiopian. The forms of their letters, i.e. hieroglyphs, are Ethiopian. For of the two kinds of writings which the Egyptians have, that which is known as popular, demotic, so this is the demotic script we just spoke about, is learned by everyone. So in Egypt, everybody learns how to write in demotic, while that which is called sacred, hieroglyphics, is understood only by the priests. So it's important that we take away from this the fact that not everyone in Egypt could read. Even though they could all write in demotic, they couldn't read the hieroglyphs. So this means that a separation had formed. It's really important that we understand that a separation had formed, because essentially, Egyptologists will tell you, well, it's the same words. It's the same ancient Egyptian language, but there's an issue here. And the issue is that the people who can read demotic text can't read the hieroglyphs. So there's been a breakdown in the communication. There's been a breakdown in that only people who are priests are able to make that distinction. Okay, so let's carry on reading. It's understood only by the priests of the Egyptians, who learn it from their fathers as one of the things which are not divulged. So they keep it a secret how to read the hieroglyphs. But it says, but among the Ethiopians, everyone uses these forms of letters. So it's clear there it's saying, however, amongst the Ethiopians, still the Central Africans, everybody can read hieroglyphs. In Egypt, it's a secret. In Kemet, it's a secret. It's only the priests. Everyone can read demotic and write demotic, but they don't understand the glyphs. If you want to get understanding of the glyphs, it's the priests of the Egyptians or it's the Ethiopians, i.e. the Central Africans. Let's quickly say a big thank you to Turtle Island Eidos, who says, when did demotic replace hieratic? That's a very good question. And the answer would be, I think, in and around, correct me if you think wrong, because I'm not going to Google it. I don't have anything in front of me, but I think it's in and around like 400-500 BC date. But correct me if you think I'm wrong, by the way, there, when demotic started to become quite popular. I know it was almost universal by the time of the Ptolemaic dynasty, but feel free to jump in and correct me there. Someone can Google it and put it in the chat. Okay, but thank you very much for that donation. I could check out for you if no one's put it in the chat by the end of the live stream. I will do a search for you. I appreciate your $20 donation. Okay, let's carry on. So the important thing I want to just show you there really quickly was to qualify what I was saying about the difference between Demotic script and the ancient Egyptian hieroglyph. They coexist at the same time. They allegedly translate the same language, and yet only one of them is able to, they're not communicating, so to speak. They've become separated through time. Now, let's carry on with this stream because it's quite important. Central Africans think of Sudan, South, East, and West. Okay, if you want to know the Ethiopians, that's probably the easiest way to think of it. So think of Sudan, east of Sudan, west of Sudan, south of Sudan. That's your quote unquote Ethiopian territory, I would say. Sudan being Kush would be the best starting place for you, because that's normally the place associated with Ethiopia, but it went on further than that. Okay, so the start of the end. By the time of the Hellenic period, the Kemetic populace had lost the ability to read hieroglyphs. So this is really important. Demotic had become its own thing. Excuse my typo, I said things. Its own things. And although descending from Meduneta, it lacked the metaphysical/conceptual component which provided context for communication. So although they obviously are still the closest in terms of the writing system, it's still going to be the closest one in existence to the hieroglyphs. There had been something lost there. Okay, now let's move on, because now we're going to start moving on to some actual concepts. So what are we saying about hieroglyphs? Let's try and jump into some of that now. So first of all, let's talk about the limitations of translation to English. Think about when we get a piece of ancient Egyptian text. What is our goal? Our goal is to understand it. And how do we understand it? We understand it by translating it to English. Now, this might not sound very groundbreaking to you guys, but here's a really important thing to note. English did not exist when people were writing and speaking their variations of ancient Egyptian. I'm going to repeat that. English did not exist. So we have this, what we have to understand is our languages that we speak are shaped by our culture. Okay, the languages we speak are shaped by our culture, i.e. the words that become canonized in a language are shaped by culture. And that's why you have words existing for certain concepts in some cultures that don't exist for certain concepts in other cultures. Okay, that's a real thing. In fact, I'm going to show you, I might show you a video that's really important to portray this concept. In fact, I'm going to show you a video. Let me show you this video really quickly that is going to portray this concept to you. I'm just going to show you a snippet. Let me copy. This is just going to be a clip, so this won't take long, but I want you to put into context of the conversation that we're having right now. Let's boom, here we go. Hope this is the right video link.
So I know it's been 2020.
Okay, I hope this is the right video link, because I feel like, what is it this video doing? I think it is the right one. Hope so. I could have got it completely wrong. Is this the wrong link? No, that is the wrong link. So that's the wrong. Why is it playing the wrong video? No, that's right. It's right. Okay, let's hope. I think I might have copied the wrong link, but let's Let's have a
time
look.
too. Like in English, we think
Okay,
of the
that's right.
past as behind and the future as ahead. As a result, if we gesture about time, we tend to gesture forward for the future and behind for the past. But in Aymara, an Andean language spoken by indigenous people in South America, last year literally translates to the year I can see, and a long time ago translates to a time way in front of me. So when Aymara speakers gesture about time, they point backwards to talk about the future and forwards to talk about the past. That means that their concept of time is literally affected by the language they use to express it. Now, these studies by themselves don't entirely prove my hypothesis because they're about differences between two separate languages. And when we're talking about decades, we're talking about a difference within the English language. But this does seem like a relevant analogy and study to me because we're beginning to understand that the words we have available to us to describe the world around us do help shape the way we understand and think about the world. And that's another reason why the loss of decades is a problem, because we didn't just lose the concept.
Sorry, I'm going to go back a bit further because the point I wanted to get to is he speaks about a hunter-gatherer people who have far more words for smell than we have in the English language.
Impressions that they make. And during the study, people who spoke Jahai were able to name and identify identify what has changed over the passage of time. And, that's just my own analysis. But there is some linguistic science to back up the idea that words have a huge impact on the way we think about the world and about time itself. So there's this fascinating study that was recently profiled in the New Yorker. In the study, English speakers' ability to describe smells was compared to people who speak Jahai, a language spoken by hunter-gatherers living on the border of Malaysia and Thailand. Now, unlike English, Jahai has lots of unique, specific words for different kinds of smells and the sense impressions that they make. And during the study, people who spoke Jahai were able to name and identify new smells they had never encountered before much more quickly than English speakers. Their noses aren't different from English speakers, but their words are. And because they had the words to describe smells, they literally perceived them more clearly. And there's evidence that this function.
So that's what I wanted to show you. Okay. Now, some of you might be asking straight away, why did you waste 2 minutes of our life showing us that? But the point that I wanted to communicate to you is that languages are shaped by the cultures of the people that formulate them. The hunter-gatherer group that he just mentioned there, the Jahai, smell is very important to them. So they formulated a lexicon of words around smells, and this enhances their ability to smell accurately. Now, why is that important? Because African culture is not European culture, and it certainly isn't British culture. And in British culture, we have a language or a lexicon that has been formed around the way of thinking here. Okay. And that means we're trying to take words which were formed under a completely different cultural foundation and translate them into a language where perhaps they don't have the words to transliterate with great fidelity. We're going to miss something in that transmission, especially if we're looking for a single word. I would argue that it's very rare. It's in very rare occasions you'll find a single word that does what the original word is doing in ancient Egyptian. I find it hard enough. Those of you, I'm taking Yoruba lessons at the moment, by the way, because I need to. So soon I'll be speaking it fluently. But the amount of times we come across a word and the only way to translate that word is to use a sentence is really, at this point, it's just becoming the norm. And this is something that you guys will find if you don't speak, and if you anyone who speaks another language, particularly an African language, and tries to translate to English, there's a disconnect. And for some reason, people just think that that disconnect suddenly disappears when it comes to ancient Egyptian. And I would argue it would be amplified and enhanced tenfold because of the distance of proximity in time and the distance of proximity in culture. we live in a time now where our languages have had a chance to adjust to English and to create bridging terms and to find its way closer to the English way of thinking, whereas the ancient Egyptians have no frame of reference. So we have to understand that this is going to be, when people take text. So, for instance, one of the people that I'm a fan of is the Indian Yenzi channel, who I've watched a couple of other videos. And I know people have ridiculed her when she takes a single hieroglyph and she forms an entire sentence out of it. And I actually think that's the correct method. I think that's what should be doing. You know, we should be looking at a conceptual layer of each hieroglyph and not just going, this means I, you know, these three glyphs means her. This, I think there's more to it than that. And I'm going to give you examples of why the simplified version that we're kind of given priority to based on the teachings of Egyptology might not be everything. Okay, there might be more to it. I'm not going to rubbish anything, by the way. I'll make that very, very clear. But I just want you to think on a slightly more metaphysical layer and think about who the ancient Egyptians were to kind of help you to get there. But anyway, so let's carry on. So we just looked at that example that I gave you. I now want you to think about tonal language as well, because this adds a whole new layer as well to, and this is something that is not repeated and not reflected in the slightest in English. It is, I think, I want to say Cantonese and perhaps Mandarin are tonal as well, but a lot of African languages are tonal, including Yoruba. So before we dive into this, and I can explain tonal languages quite easily. I'm going to show you a video that summarizes the effect of tonal languages in like a minute and a half. I hope you don't mind me jumping in, but this will give you another layer of understanding. And then afterwards, I'm going to explain why I think there was a tonal layer aspect in the ancient Egyptian language as well. So let's quickly get that video on. Where's it gone? Come back, please do not disappear. Here it is. Here. Another excellent video that I found. Let me just quickly pop it on. And this won't take long at all, I hope. Yep, that's the right one. So I told you I'm learning Yoruba, and I'm just using Yoruba for a reference language, by the way. I know some people say there are links between the Yoruba language and ancient Egyptian. I actually think that there's definitely some truth in that, but I'm not going to be touching that concept today. I more want you to kind of like get this idea. By the way, this channel, you can see the name of it, Claw Teaches Yoruba. If you're interested in Yoruba, I can tell you, as someone who's learning it at the moment, excellent channel. Visit, give it a subscribe. Okay, but let me just go from here. It's got to do that weird thing where it doesn't want to play videos for me. Who remembers when I was trying to react to that video for ages and it just wouldn't play the video for me? Does anyone remember that? That was so weird. I hope it doesn't do it again. Let me try refreshing. It's doing it. I can't believe this. Does anyone remember how I figured this out when this did this to me last time, when it just wouldn't play the video for me? It's like it will pick certain videos and it'll just decide, nope, you're not listening to that on your live stream. How did I get around this? This is so frustrating. Why is it doing this? Let me try changing the speed. Maybe that'll do it. Nope. It's not having it. This is so irritating. Only does this when I'm live streaming. try again. Yeah, this is bizarre. YouTube, man, never fails to sabotage me for no good reason. It's not gonna play, is it? Let me try another browser. I'm sure even when I tried another browser, it didn't work, you know. I remember this. It was just the weirdest thing in the world. It's like YouTube just bottlenecked it. Let me try. I'm trying Edge now. From here. That's working. Okay, cool. All right, everyone's here. Let's go. I'm hoping not to download it.
Use of tone marks is key to properly reading, writing, and speaking the Yoruba language. This is important because some words have similar spelling, but at the addition of tone marks, these words will take different meanings. There are three types of tone marks. The first one is the low tone, amisale, do, do. This is represented by a left to right slanted line. The second one is the high tone, amioke, mi, mi. This is represented.
You said there's an echo, people.
By right to.
Okay, let me just mute my microphone. Here, if I mute my
left slanted line. And the last one is the mid tone, amiari, re, re. This is represented by a dash sign or left without any sign. These marks are applied to the top of the vowels within each syllable of a word or phrase. Now, let's look at the vowels in the Yoruba language.
So I'm muting myself really quickly. We're going to skip ahead from the vowels. And what I want to do is now go and show you some examples of words. And this is key. Words that are spelt the same, but based on their intonation, give you a different meaning, because it gives some really good examples. And I'm going to show those to you guys now. Okay.
Yoruba. Now, let us take examples of words with similar spellings, but which takes up different meanings at the application of tonal marks. The first example is O, G, O. If we apply the tonal marks of do, do, we will have Ojo, Ojo, which means rain. And if we apply the tonal marks of re, re, we will have Ojo, Ojo, which is timid. Now, let us take another example. A, bi, a. If we apply the tonal marks of re, mi, we will have a, pa, which is hand. If we apply the tonal marks of do, mi, we will have a, pa, which is scar. If we apply the tonal marks of do, do, we will have a, pa, which is vandal. From these examples, we can all see how the understanding of the use of tonal marks is key to properly reading, writing, and speaking the Yoruba language.
Okay, so that brings to a conclusion what we're going to cover today in terms of tonal marks. But what I wanted to communicate there is definitely not to try and get you to understand the full scope of tonal marks, but I wanted to communicate to you the importance, or at least the presence, I should say, of tonality in many African languages. And I think we've got Wildflower in the chat basically saying that's the case in Luganda as well. Okay, so this is East, we have a West African language, and I believe many more African languages that use tonality, use the existence of tones. Now, why is this pressing? Because in the ancient Egyptian language, what we have is a lot of homophony, okay, i.e. a lot of homophonic words. These are words that are spelt exactly the same. And bear in mind, ancient Egyptian language tended to leave out consonants as a whole. So you have words like, you know, NB, which is Nub, and NB, which is Neb. Well, actually, we don't know if it's Neb. It could be Nub. They could both be Nub. One could be Noob, and the other one could be Noob. But we assume the E a lot of the time, and a lot of the time it's non-E. But one means Lord, and the other means gold. Now, what would be the difference in terms of how these words were pronounced? I believe would be tonality, and this probably would be something that would be known amongst the people. There's no, unless you are assuming they're doing a whole bunch of vowel swapping, which I think probably wasn't the case. I'd assume a lot of these words that were spelled identically probably were identically written. However, they had a tonal indicator, something to suggest that there was a difference in the tonality of them. Okay, so we have homophony, i.e. the same phonetic construction, the same way it's being constructed. However, the word in the end has a different meaning. And the way you fix this is by having a tonal language. Okay, so this is quite important. Now, let's carry on. The limitations of translation to English. So think about a polysemic word. Now, obviously, you guys have this could actually be called Unk Part 3, because we've done a few of these Unk videos, but I brought back my Unk concept here just because I think it's a fitting one to build upon. So obviously I've expressed the fact that I believe that Unk is a kind of a conceptual depiction of a front-facing bovine, but a specific African Shanga cattle. Actually, on that note, you know what, something I actually missed? And I thought, how did I miss that? The word Ankh is in Shanga as well. How did I miss that? The word Shanga is literally Ankh, because the conversion of the back of the throat to G is very, very common. So I even missed that. It's like it's in every single bovine derivative in Africa. We have the word Ankh in it. But anyway, so yeah. So I believe it's a depiction of the Shanga cattle front facing with the horns tied, or the Ankole cattle, another word that has it in there. Okay, so we have a single word with multiple meanings. So I'm talking about polysemic words here, because this is quite important. Okay, polysemic words where you have one word, but that word invites you to a concept. So although we have the word, and I'm saying, okay, we have the word cow, it meant far more than cow in the ancient Egyptian language, far more. It would have had tons of different kind of like connotations. So how have I built up on this here? There's 3 levels that we need to look at this from. Okay, we look at it from the mimetic level. Okay, what it physically is, or what it physically kind of represents or sounds like. All right, so we have the physical thing over here, which would be the mimetic level, which be, okay, this is a cow. Then we have the allegorical level. The allegorical level is the associative level, i.e. what are the things then that we associate with this symbol? So if this symbol to the ancient Egyptians was a cow, okay, what things do we associate with the cow? This is the allegorical layer. I've written down a few here. These are just ones that I've written down. Milk, food, herd, subsistence, dowry, inheritance. These are things that we associate with the cow. Okay. Then there's the third layer, and this is the conceptual or the symbolic layer. And these are things that the cow symbolizes. And the reason this part is really important, actually, it kind of overlaps with allegorical a little bit, but the reason this one's specifically important is because this is when you get into that deep cultural importance of the thing that is being depicted. This is where we start to look at the deep cultural importance. So if you don't understand the cultural nature of that thing, just like in the Ankh video, if you don't understand the culture of the fact that you get inheritance, you know, you can receive cows as an inheritance, you don't understand that you need cows as a dowry. If you don't understand, even on a basic level, that, you know, you need the cow's milk for subsistence, that you need to keep them as a sign of wealth. If you don't understand those things, then the utilization, this is what a lot of comments I got in my feedback for the Ankh video is, how can the cow, how can it be a cow? You think it's just a cow? Cows are stupid. When people say that, they don't understand the significance of the cow to modern Africans or to ancient Egyptians. They don't understand it, because if they understood the significance of the cow, they'd know that is literally the most holy animal, the most important animal in ancient Egyptian culture is the cow, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Okay, so I've said here the conceptual or the symbolic layer is the one where you have to have a deep cultural understanding. So I've put things here like nourishment, strength, life, wealth, health, legacy is an important one. Okay, legacy, vitality, sustenance, fertility, family, and traditions. These are all concepts that we could link with the cow easily in ancient Egyptian culture, and easily in lots of modern African cultures, such as the Ankole and several other, the Dinkas, etc. You could easily link all of these concepts to the cow. So this is where what you do is you get a bigger understanding of the role that this symbol plays in the ancient Egyptian language. We're starting to get a bigger understanding, and what this will do is it will start to add layers and start to add understanding to how that symbol was being used in the ancient Egyptian language. So let's move on to the next slide, because I think this will provide some context to the point that I'm making. The Ankh in context. If I then hold that symbol or bestow it unto another, so if I take that Ankh symbol that we're talking about, perhaps as a priest, and I touch it to the face of a pharaoh, am I just bestowing the vague concept of life? Once again, we interpret it to the word life. Why? Because we're taking an ancient Egyptian or an African concept and we're putting it in the English language. Life is very limited. It's a very, very limited word. It is conceptual, so it was a good choice of a word, I'm not going to lie, but it's still very limited. It doesn't reflect the entirety of the conceptual layer or the importance that it held in the ancient Egyptian community. So is it enough to just say this means life? No, it's not. It means more. Am I just bestowing the vague concept of life or the very real concept of Ankh? Ankh is a very real concept to the people that live in that region, to the people of ancient Egypt. Can you see the limitations of translation? So think about this symbol here. I was thinking about Akhenaten. And if you were on my last live stream, I think I put the question out to you guys where I said to you, what do you think the significance is of touching someone's face with the Ankh? And I said I was going to talk about it later. So this is kind of that later. I was thinking about the fact that there are depictions of Akhenaten and Nefertiti with Aten, the son Netta, touching his face and Nefertiti's face with the Ankh. Now, a lot of people would just say, oh, well, it's just, the son or, Aten touching them and blessing them with life. But I think it's deeper than that. Let's think about what we've discussed, the conceptual layer. Is this signifying the start of a new legacy? Is this signifying the start of a new life for ancient Egyptians? Is this Aten promising him sustenance and longevity? Is this Aten nourishing him and promising him good health? Is this his way of saying, out with the old way of life and in with the new traditions. So do you understand how if we understand the ancient Egyptian language from that conceptual layer, not just that literal layer that we're given, it becomes something that is far more informative to us, far more informative to what's being depicted. Think about Anubis. I was thinking about this symbology of Anubis carrying the Ankh. Okay, so this is you in the afterlife being guided by Anubis. And what does Anubis carry? He's carrying your traditions. He's carrying your legacy in his hand. I just thought that's quite powerful. It's a bit more powerful than this life. Anubis carries your legacy in his hand. You know, he carries your traditions. He's carrying them. He's carrying the contents of everything that you've achieved, your wealth, your health, your legacy. He carries that within his hands into the afterlife. It's a slight difference in the way that we're interpreting the words. Once again, not trying to take away from the obviously our current knowledge or understanding of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, but just adding to it this additional layer of conceptual / symbolic, because this is how the language itself was constructed. Okay. So yeah, that's just a little bit of a case study of us looking at the Ankh in context to help us to understand how we might be able to apply this. Okay. Let me go through the comments really quickly. Zara said you should do university lectures. I'd love to, man. Get me invited to university. I'd do that with pleasure. Curious to explore my ancestry. I think a lot of people, let me know if this is making sense to you. Just pop a little like a 1 in the chat or just something to let me know if, for instance, our kind of breakdown of the Ankh resonated or if it made any sense. Because to me, it made more sense when I thought about it conceptually in that way. But just let me know in the chat. Cool. Excellent. So I've got a few ones there, so that's good. It doesn't look like it's, and let me know if the pace is okay as well. Let me know if I'm going too fast or if I'm going too slow or whatever. I want to move on now. We've touched on the Ankh. Let's move on to the next one. So once again, I'm going to carry on with limitations of translating to English. So we looked on the fact that we're missing that tonal layer. We've also touched on the fact that we have to be able to explain or at least address the concept of the language being homophonic. We also touched on the fact that the symbols themselves are very polysemic. Some of these words are so deep, they require full explanation. And I'm going to give you an example of that with my very limited understanding of the Yoruba language, okay, with a term that I grew up hearing a lot, okay, and that term is pele. I'm trying to pronounce my P's properly. You heard it, how he did it over here in that video. He was going appa. They have a really it's a very wide P, and it takes a lot of practice. So I'm trying to get there. But there is pele, okay. So this is the concept. And now, what does this word mean? Now, if you was to talk to a Yoruba person on the surface, just to get the English out of the way, they say, "Oh, it means sorry." Okay. Thank you, David. He's actually correcting me. So I've actually spelled it incorrectly. It's a kapele. I'm just like kapele. Okay, thank you, David, for that. Okay, so if you was to talk to a Yoruba person who just wanted to kind of rush you out the door with it, they go, "Oh, it means sorry. It means sorry." However, if you're a Yoruba person, you know it doesn't mean sorry. And this is a really good analogy or example of what happens probably a lot of the time with the ancient Egyptian language, where they just kind of look for the nearest English word. Oh, yes. If you translated pele to sorry, and you was to see pele being used in context, you would realize that you miss out quite a lot. And what I've done here is I've tried to list all of the concepts, all of the different ways that I've seen pele or pele, applied in real life. Okay. And here's what I've come up with. So I've said it's a term that says it basically beckons the receiver to, by the way, this is quite interesting as well. And Yoruba people may or may not have noticed this. There's no Yoruba word for sorry. I'd say once again, we were talking earlier about the differences in the cultures. There's no Yoruba word for sorry. I'm sorry. We don't have that concept in Yoruba. We really have two words that kind of like embody that, and that's bele, the one that I'm covering here, and ma binu. And both of those are appellations to the receiver. And this is quite interesting because it actually shows you a difference in the culture. In the English language, you say, I'm sorry. Okay. So it's kind of centered around the I, and it doesn't really require anything from the receiver from it. You just say, I'm sorry. Okay. In the Yoruba language, both words that kind of relate to sorry are appellations towards the receiver. So we say pele, which is something that we're kind of throwing out to people. Or we say ma binu, which means don't be mad, don't be angry. Okay. They're both things that we say to the receiver. Okay, so both of them are appellations towards the receiver, whereas the nerd large says shock on Nigerians that have the concept of I'm sorry. It's not that. It's that it's more than sorry. Okay, sorry in itself is, and this is going to be me being biased, sorry in itself is useless. It doesn't do anything for anyone. Okay, so let me break that down to you by breaking down this word pele. So this word pele says, it kind of tells the receiver, overcome sorrow. Okay, you're sad now. You say bele, bele, jare. That means overcome sorrow. It also means take strength, receive strength. You know, take strength. Bele, bele, jare. You know, you might pick someone up by the arm and go bele, bele. You know, they're falling over. Receive strength, bele. Receive love. You know, your mum will kind of give you a bele and pat you on the back and give you a hug. Okay, it's an offer of support. It says be optimistic. You can say pele as a way of kind of like pele, to be optimistic. You know, don't pele, Jerry. You say pele. It kind of in the tone that you say, it says no. You know, it's not all bad. Don't worry. It's about to get better. Give empathy to someone. You say, oh, pele, pele. Like I feel what you feel. Yeah. Sharing of burden. Yeah. You can say pele and kind of like share the burdens. Oh, pele. You know, you're there with them. You know, you're shouldering it with them. It can also kind of be a projection of favoritism as well. You know, you kind of go like to the one that you love the most, so to speak. Okay, and it can also provide comfort and safety. Now, I know this sounds kind of wide, but there just isn't a one-to-one translation of it. Okay, there just isn't a one-to-one translation of this word pele. It is, like Macy has just said beautifully, a nuance of different concepts. All very, very closely related, but they are different. Okay. And it can be said in all of these different ways. Now, here's where it gets interesting. If we just took that word pele and let's say the Yoruba language died, and then 1,000 years later, they're translating Yoruba text. And every time they come across that word pele, they translate it to sorry. Yeah. Super Thing Guy says it means condolence. I think it means the concept of condolence. Okay, so I got it there. So I think it means the concept of condolence. Johnny, see you later. Nice having you. So the point being that by just translating it to sorry, you would miss a lot. Okay, you would miss a lot. Now here's the question to you guys, because this is where it gets interesting. We start to relate it back to the ancient Egyptian language. Okay, what symbol would you use to convey such a group of concepts? We've just gone through all of the kind of like the different things that pele means. If you had to give it a symbol, what symbol would you give it? Okay, that's a question to you guys. I'm throwing that out there to you guys right now. Okay, let me know what you think or what you come up with, because this is just a bit of an exercise to kind of show you how these languages develop. Okay, at least how this language / picture script is developed. If you had to come up with a word, or sorry, a symbol to communicate Pele, what would you come up with? Jan Steen says 2 hearts. I like that. Okay. Let's see what else you come up with. I want to see a few more suggestions, then I'm going to move on to the next slide. See what people come up with. The concept of Pele. How would you... Flowers, that's nice. A circle. I want you to expand on that, Zehoven. I kind of see where you're going, but I want you to expand on that. Antebellum says we don't have symbols, we just have different words. Okay, we'll share those if you want to. You know, it's funny. Antebellum says earlier, Yoruba don't have a word for admitting that they're wrong. I kind of have to nod and agree. Yeah, it's kind of it is what it is. Nadepot. Okay, Ndapota. I beg. Translated, sorry. Okay, so I've been corrected by someone in the chat. There is kind of a word for sorry. Oh no, that's Shona. Okay, sorry. I thought I didn't recognize that. I was like, I'm sure there's no Yoruba word for sorry. They're already listed. So we've got a pyramid, someone said. I like that. Praying hands, that's nice. No broken ends, unification of feelings, I guess. I see what you did there. Okay, I see what you did there. All right, I like all of those answers. 2 hands offering a cow's hind parts, whatever is treasured in that society, or whatever is treasured in that society. Okay, I like that as well. So 2 hands offering something. I really like that. Now, here's what I came up with, and this is why this is going to be interesting to you, or at least it was interesting to me. The first thing that came to my mind, hug is nice as well. Very emoji like their wildflower. The first thing that came to my mind was a house. I thought I'd symbolize Pele with a house, because to me, like, it just kind of makes sense. You know, a house is where home symbolizes all of these things to me. Okay, this is where you'll find the people who will be doing that. To me, I think home for all of these. When I think of the term Pele, I think the best way to communicate it is home. That's just me personally, by the way. All of your suggestions were probably as good or better than mine. But here's what's really interesting. So I looked up the ancient Egyptian symbol for home, and it's per, which you guys would have come across before. Okay, that's the first part of the term pero or pharaoh, which means great house. So here's what's really, really, really interesting. Now, this is just a coincidence. I must stress, this is a coincidence. It's a coincidence because I haven't done any linguistic linking or anything like that. It's purely a coincidence. The word, ancient Egyptian word for house, which is per, P-R, okay, P-R, could be translated to Pele, which is interesting. I just thought that was really interesting. Now, it's just a coincidence, but I'm giving you that coincidence to show you how these things can happen in language. But I thought that was quite amazing because I thought of a house, then I looked at the ancient Egyptian for house, and I had essentially the same word, Pele, Pele. Now, why is that? Someone says there's no such thing as coincidence, allegedly. It is until Obenga verifies the link between these two terms. I withdraw myself. I'm not a linguist. I'm definitely not trying to create that link. Okay, so at the moment, it's purely a coincidence. But if it wasn't a coincidence, that kind of evolution is something that you see in language, where something can begin meaning one thing, but in the way that it's applied, it becomes something else. So I just thought that was quite interesting, but that became a really good kind of like container for me to have this discussion and talk about the way that you would use a symbol to portray a concept, because then it becomes really easy. And imagine just think about this now in terms of the way the word pharaoh was used in ancient Egyptian society. We think of pharaoh, you know, once again, we get the English translation, great house. But what did great house mean? Because we know that the house or great house in Pharaoh kind of referred to the physical home or the family home of the Pharaoh, or the family home of the ruler, the ruling family, the noble family, before it was applied individually to the actual king, the Nesut. So before it was applied to the king, it was applied to the king's family home. Now think about why they would apply the term that is used for the family home for the king, and think conceptually. Again, someone said great home, that's the exact translation. Exactly, it's called the great house. Pero means house great. Okay, it's the great house. Think about why would they now start applying that term for the ruler? What things did they associate with the house of the king? Is it the same things that we're saying here? Is it, you know, the king's ability to apply strength, to be sympathetic, to provide a shelter for the entire nation? Think about it on that conceptual layer, because that's how the ancient Egyptian language worked. It wasn't just, they weren't just calling him great house, oh great house. It was more than that. It was the concept behind what one's house meant, what this symbol of house meant. Think about what that meant on a conceptual layer. I didn't even talk about this. The symbol for house is this, basically from plan view, a building with an open area of the wall. Okay, i.e. access. This is what makes it home. It's an open wall. There was a closed wall as well, but the closed wall version was called het. But the open wall version, which was home, had, i.e. an open door, place to enter. Someone said shelter, safety. So there's a deeper layer, or more kind of like inviting layer to what the term great house. They could have called him a hero, which would have been, or heto, which would have been great temple or great house, but they called him pero, which is great home. This is something more inviting and more opening. So this is quite interesting. So once again, it's just that layer, and that was just a coincidence, but I thought I'd share that with you. So let's move on. Polysemic concepts became monosemic words. One could argue that our entire transliteration of ancient Egyptian language suffers from cultural untranslatability. I don't know if that's a word, by the way. Since the language precedes our own, the culture is foreign, and there has been little or no effort to borrow from ethnographic groups. When I say ethnographic groups, we're talking about the local ones that shared historic cultural similarities with the ancient Egyptians. We all know that hasn't been done. So the people who actually practice culture similar to ancient Egypt have not been studied, and therefore we are losing a layer of understandability of the language. We are losing that unless we do that reconnection, just like we did with Ankh. Okay, impossible to do those things without a full understanding of what the cow means in that society. This has resulted in a massive oversimplification of and euphemization, i.e., you know, euphemisms, when you kind of like take loads of understandings and just come up with a really simplistic way of explaining it, of polysemic words into single meaning transliterations. So this is what I was explaining before, taking these really involved and multi-layered concepts and just giving you a single word out of it, which loses entire meaning, which also, due to not respecting the metaphysical visual nature of ancient Egyptian pictographic script, introduces fatal errors. Okay, and I know I already introduced there, I'm supposed to say introduces, but it introduces fatal errors. So we start to miss a large part of what the language is. And just like Wildflower says there in the comments, language transmits culture. The language you speak is a reflection of the culture. Just like that Indonesian hunter, was it Indonesian? I think it was Malaysian hunter-gatherer society that guy mentioned earlier. They have a culture where smell is important. So they have a language that is rich in words that can describe smells. Think about how that applies to different concepts and different cultures that surround you. and think about the ancient Egyptian, what did they prioritize and how deep and rich was their language around those key concepts? It's really important to kind of understand. Okay. So why ideograms are perfect for polysemic words. So once again, when we talk about polysemic words, we are talking about words that are multi-layered, words that have multiple meanings, conceptual words, not words that are just singular. And actually, there's actually a really good polysemic word in the British language, believe it or not. One of the only ones I could think of, and that's the word love. In fact, in English probably have the most polysemic version of love that there is, because in the English understanding of the word love, it encapsulates your children, your mother, your sister, your brother, your parents, your wife, there's so many people that you can love in different ways. It's a very, very multi-layered word in the English language. A lot of people say it's a bit lazy, but the point of the matter is it does exist and it's incredibly multi-layered. That is an example of a polysemic word in the English language. Now, consider a deeply polysemic word like the Pele I just showed you. What symbol would you use to depict it? We've done that. Now, how about one of the most polysemic words in the English language, love? How would you capture every English concept associated with love? That's quite difficult, isn't it? It's quite difficult. So take the English word love, yeah? And let's be really lazy, okay? So let's be really lazy, like unfortunately sometimes happens in Egyptology, okay? And let's boil the English word love down to only one aspect of the English word love, and let's boil it down to marital intercourse. Okay, so we take this one single concept because that's the first one we come across, and something happens in England, and 1,000 years later our society is completely gone and they don't understand the English language anymore, but they've got a Rosetta Stone of sorts, and they come across the concept of love, but they have no frame of reference apart from that first introduction, which basically told them, oh, love, that means marital intercourse. Okay. And then they're flicking through English texts, and what do they see? Oh, David loved his kids. Oh my gosh, these people are sick. What's going on? These people are disgusting. And Jenny loved her mum. Oh my God, this is horrendous. They're a bunch of rapists. Okay. You know where I'm going with this. Okay. You have a deep polysemic concept, okay, that is being simplified by transliteration. And this is happening right now in ancient Egypt. It's happening, okay, where people are taking these things that have got so many layers of understanding and they're simplifying it to the extent where they just are missing. Okay, they just are missing. This is the point. So this is why it's really important for us to start to try and unpick these conceptual layers. Otherwise, what's going to happen is we're going to end up, and this is kind of what's been happening. Actually, if you look through the ancient Egyptian texts and a lot of the translations that you get or transliterations that you get from Egyptologists, everything seems to be about war, conquest, worship me, war, conquest, worship me. Nothing seems to go outside of those kind of like layers of understanding. They think that all of the ancient Egyptian pharaohs and stuff were just really arrogant people. And that's because I believe a lot of this is coming from a massive limitation in the way they're understanding and interpreting the terminology that they're coming across. It's limiting what they're coming out with. And we have to almost, I wouldn't say start from scratch, but we have to kind of start to apply this richer understanding of the polysemic nature of African languages and apply that to ancient Egyptian so that we start getting a richer picture. Okay. So let's jump on to a couple of examples. Yeah, let's do that. Where is, oh, I need my text. I'm sure I put that in there. Why has it disappeared? I put some text in this and it's disappeared. Let me find it so I can find the picture that I've taken. I can quickly add it. In fact, I can read it. I can read it. So let me go on to significant symbols. Okay, this will be news to some of you. In fact, let's start off with who was aware that the ancient Egyptian scarab is a dung beetle? Put a 1 in the chat if you knew that already. Okay, so the ancient Egyptian scarab, that sacred beetle that you see in ancient Egypt, is actually the common dung beetle. Mason knew. Fantastic. One of the most sacred creatures, once again, in Kemetic understanding. Good, loads of people are putting 1s in there. Got a 2 in there. That means I properly understood. Yeah. So we have the concept of, let me just quickly pop that on the screen. Now, why is that significant? Let's read together. I'm going to read a piece of text to you guys. All right. And this is going to maybe open some eyes. Okay. So this is from Clements Stromata, book 5, chapter 4. Okay. And I want you all to listen to this because this is actually quite important. Just pop you guys back on the screen here. Okay, brilliant. So listen up. Let the following stand as a specimen of the third species, the enigmatic. For the rest of the stars, on account of their oblique course, they have figured like the bodies of serpents. Now listen here. This is really important, guys. Listen here. But the sun, like that of a beetle, because it makes a round figure of ox dung. And I want you to look at the screen, guys. And rolls it before its face. And they say that this creature lives 6 months underground and the other division of the year above ground. And listen up, this is really important, guys. And emits its seed into the ball and brings forth, and that there is not a female beetle. Now, I want you to put the sacredness of the scarab into context, because you see this in hieroglyphs everywhere. Someone just mentioned it is called the Kepra. Okay, and actually, let me just quickly pop a comment on the screen because I didn't know that. I was happy to see this. So Shona, have a look at this. In Shona, the word kipiri means second, next, or forthcoming. Woo! That is smoking, because the reason that is so significant is because the scarab or the beetle or the kepri, whatever you want to call it, kepa. Whoops, what did I just do? The kepa, I don't know what I just did there. Signified life, not just life, new life to the ancient Egyptians. The ball that you see that has often been misinterpreted as being just the sun, often in ancient Egyptian was a depiction of the dung beetle, and the little dot in the middle signified a seed. So this was so what you see in the dung beetle is basically a roll around womb. The dung beetle basically rolls the womb around and protects it between its hind legs. Now I want you to have a look at the hind legs of the dung beetle here, okay? And I want you to have this depiction of Hathor over here, which people have always said is horns, which I'm not going to argue with, but I want you to consider another consideration. And the reason I'm going to say this is because what you'll find is in depictions of Hathor, the ball is never yellow or white like the sun, okay? It's always browny red, always. And you can look, I'm talking about actual real depictions of it. It's always browny red. And when it has that little dot in the middle, which people interpret as Ra, that actually symbolizes the seed in the center of the ball. Remember, the kepra or the dung beetle is sacred. So this, I believe, this is a dual, what's the word? This is kind of like a dual meaning when you see this, particularly if it had the dot showing. The dot symbolizes the center, there being a seed in the womb. So this could be remember, Hathor was a symbol of fertility. Remember, Hathor was the netter of fertility. She was present if there was fertility, if there was birth taking place. So this remembers the dung beetle doesn't represent the moving of the sun. Well, it can to you if you want the dung beetle to represent the moving of the sun. But what's significant about the dung beetle moving the dung around is that its seed is at the center. Okay, the seed is at the center of the dung. That's what was the belief, was this idea of there being a rebirth. Now, so it's more than just the it doesn't roll that ball around for no reason. The idea is that there is life, exactly. So I'm thinking it's a dual representation here, not a single representation. Okay, this is why the dung beetle or the kepper was a representation, or at least you'll see it being translated as the image of. They'll normally say the image of, okay, born in the image of, okay. However, it's more than just that. It also represents new life, new birth, okay, an offspring, one soon to be born, a pregnancy perhaps. And why is this quite important? Is because we can see this reflected in other things. I want to quickly show you a very, very famous use of the kepper and the ball Ra, some which I think has a dual meaning, both of the sun but also of new birth. And I'm going to kind of support that by showing you a very famous one, which you're probably going to be familiar with. So this is the who knows whose hieroglyph this is? Someone tell me if you recognize these hieroglyphs. I'll be very impressed. I know a few of you will get this straight away. Whose hieroglyphs are these? I'm going to give you a bit of time to put it on the screen. Okay, RJ got there very, very quickly. Well done. Akhenaten is close because he has a very similar Keper representation as Tutankhamun. Has a very similar. In fact, I'm going to throw a little curveball out there. So we call them Akhenaten and Tutankhamun. I actually think that is not the names they went by. We don't put enough emphasis on their throne names. So this is King Tutankhamun on the right. This is his throne name. Okay. And his throne name, depending on where you read it from, is Keperu. It's Ru because the 3 stripes beneath means plural. So we have Keper, but 3 stripes beneath means as many of these. So Keperu, it would become Neb. That means Lord. So they say. I actually think it means something different, but Keperu Neb Ra, okay, or Neb Keperu Ra, depending on which direction you read it, okay. So there's that aspect of his name, and that's his throne name. And then we have the name that we're familiar with, which we read as Tut, so Tu U T, so Tu U T, giving us Tut Ankh, and then Amen, so A M N. Or depending on how you want to pronounce it. So Tut Ankh, Iman. And for some reason, we miss out this part at the bottom. But what I've done is I've just kind of written the entire name out phonetically here from the Tat. So I've said Tut, Ankh, Hek, An, Suten, or Nesut, depending on how you read that. Amen. Okay, so Tut, Ankh, Hek, An, Suten, Amen. I don't know why we don't read that Hek, An, Suten part out. It's just ignored, but it's in all of his hieroglyphs. Now, I actually don't believe he went by either of these names. Okay, I actually don't believe he went by either of these names. And the reason I say that is because I was reading the king list by Manetho, and it's very, very clear that there was a king called of the 18th dynasty called Akenkeres, who I believe is Akhenaten, and he was followed by Keres. Now, I think that this likens to the fact that King Tutankhamun was known by this name, because obviously that's a Greek transliteration, and they would normally just kind of add the S, and the closest thing I can think of is Keper. So I actually think that King Tutankhamun probably went by the name Khepro. Okay, and his dad, or the ruler before him, some people say is his brother, Akhenaten, went by the name Akin Khepru. I think that's evidenced in the king list of Manetho, and he would have been, you know, closer to him than we are now. So I don't actually think we picked the right pharaoh names, by the way. I think we just kind of go with the ones that were given by Egyptology, and I think it's a lot of the time that's not the names they went by, basically. But anyway, I've gone off on a side note, because the reason I brought you to this slide was so we could discuss what this means. Okay, now there is a literal translation for Tutankhamun's name, and that would have been, I mean, Keper, the Lord of the image of Ra. I think this would have been translated, or the Lord of the images, the Lord of the many images of Ra, or something like that. I'm going to see if I can give you a full translation, 1 second, of what it's called based on current Egyptology, and then I'm going to give you my opinion on it afterwards. Just bear with me 1 second. Someone feel free to put in the chat if you have a translation for that name whilst I'm looking it up. Okay, so yeah, the Lord of the Manifestations of Ra is a translation that we get. Okay, so the Lord of the Manifestations of Ra. Now, I would approach this slightly differently, just based on what I know allegorically about the Keper. Okay, and this is where I would say, well, the Keper represents almost the ultimate parent, so to speak, you know, the one who oversees. So if your name is Keperu, and the Ra here is a representation of the seeds, this would be the Lord of the, you know, the Lord of many births, or the Lord of the nation, something along the lines of someone who is overseeing the birth of many children, whether that was thought of allegorically or thought of as literally, like in the case of Akhenaten, where he had, what was it, 8 kids or something like that? He had loads of kids. So it's either, you know, you're thinking like Akhenaten, where you have loads of kids, or you're thinking like Tutankhamun, who had a fair amount of kids. I know he had a couple of stillbirths, but could that be the name that's being represented here? Being that the Kepa is a representation of new birth, the new seed that's being planted. Okay, this is a allegorical layer, a conceptual layer that goes beyond just the literal translation of every time we see the word Kepa, we're going to say image or manifestation. That's a massive simplification. We have to take the Kepa into its context as what it means to us as a symbol. Okay, and it's when we understand what the Kepa means to us as a symbol that the name starts to take on some further understanding. I was even looking at the name Tutankhamun itself. Let's have a look at the, I feel like this might be a different video. I could go into this, but it's like now 11:30 now. We've been going for exactly 2 hours, and it feels like quite a good time to wrap this up before I go into some really deep kind of like symbol by symbol explanations. I feel Father of a Nation, Liz. I like that. Something along those lines. I feel, by the way, the word Lord as well. I didn't go into that. So the word Lord, Neb, is got a homophonic relation with the word Nub. Okay, i.e. they're both NB. The word Nub means gold. And the symbol for Neb here, which means Lord, is what I believe to be a gold pan, because with this word Nub, we have a complete gold pan with the heat hitting the bottom. So it's like a gold being melted in the pot. But once the gold is melted in the pot, it would be transferred to the pan, which I believe is being depicted here for Neb. So when they say someone was a Neb, it wasn't just a case of Lord like we get in the English translation. It was actually keeper of the wealth, one who is in charge of finances, one who distributes, the one who takes care of everybody, the breadwinner. That was what the symbology behind the term Neb that we translate as Lord means. It's once again conceptual. You can't just get a single term and say it means Lord. It meant, so when these pharaoh, many oftentimes pharaohs would take on this symbology of being the Neb. It didn't just mean that one thing. It had all of these concepts of the one who keeps the wealth in the best interests of the people, the one who distributes it, the one who understands it. That's what the word Neb means. Okay, Macy, I believe there would be a servant aspect to it. Okay, so that there's all of these terms that have these deep conceptual layers, and I think it's in understanding the ancient Egyptian language from that polysemic, homophonic, deeply layered African language, tonal language level of understanding, that we'll start to get much more richness and information out of the hieroglyphs that we don't quite get from the modern interpretations. Science and inspiration, you are late, and I'm afraid you're joining us right at closing time, because we're going to do a part 2 where I'm going to go into certain symbols in more detail, just like we've kind of touched on the Kepa and we looked a little bit at Neb. I want to go through a few symbols so that we can kind of have that discussion about what the deeper allegorical conceptual layer is of each of those symbols beyond the single translation we're given in Egyptology, based on the understanding that we've kind of tried to put together today. But I think I'm going to leave it there for today. So I'm going to jump into the chat. Everybody hit up the likes. Let me know what you thought of this live stream. And if you're okay with me closing it at this point. I think we're going at this point for exactly 2 hours. And it just feels like a good point to close it out. Let me know if you found it interesting and if it was informative to a degree. And if I get enough likes, RJ says he wants a part 2. That's good. If I get enough likes, I will do a part 2 possibly this week. Ice T says amazing. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I've enjoyed this. This is a subject that I've wanted to do with you guys for a really long time. So I've really enjoyed the opportunity to do it today. It has taken a lot of work, but as you can see, I've got a few slides that I need to fill up with some more information before we move on. So I think this is a good introduction. But I think on that note, we can wrap up. I'm glad most people seems to have enjoyed it. Please click the lights up, and I'm going to quickly just say another shout out to my 2 donors for today, who were, wow, a lot of comments, which is good. A lot of comments is good. I'm just scrolling up. There they are. Turtle Island Ados, thank you very much. And Keo for the wonderful $100